Welcome, Benzinga Nation, and good morning to you. Cybersecurity, it's always kind of been a thing that we've all thought about in our daily lives, and it's something that we think about even more and more in the world of AI, in the world of crypto, and with even glitches causing some chaos in our world that we live in. Now, there's different ways that we can take a look at cybersecurity from an investment standpoint. But today, we're also going to bring on guests that look at it from the government standpoint as well. And with that being said, I want to bring on my first guest, Christopher Henderson, who is the Senior Director of Threat Ops at Huntress. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, cybersecurity, as I mentioned, is such a big topic, and you can slice it in many different ways. I mean, I think it was just maybe 3 weeks ago that I read somewhere about how social security numbers were leaked from a certain source. And I had to anxiously go on a website, type in my first name, last name, date of birth to see if I was impacted. I wasn't, but my parents were. And then you kind of get into this panic mode of, I got to call everybody in terms of the credit bureaus and freeze their credit reporting. And you go through all these things. So what I'm saying is, even before AI and crypto, this was a concern, and it will continue to be a concern as we're more and more connected. But give the folks at home a little bit of insight on what it is that you do to kind of set the stage for us here.
Yeah, so my name is Chris Henderson. I run threat operations here at Huntress. So my team is responsible for all of the threat intelligence and detection engineering involved to alert our customers when attackers have breached their infrastructure. And so we have a threat intelligence arm. We work with our product teams to develop those capabilities, and then actually write the detection logic that powers our products.
When it comes to, you have hackers that might be independent, but there's so many that are also funded or sponsored or whatever you want to call it from government agencies as well. So whether it's the Russian government influence that could jeopardize our user data or any other government that we see, what can the government do to kind of protect Americans around the world that might not just be in the United States from sensitive data being leaked in the wrong hands?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things from protecting the government's own data, right? There's a number of frameworks that they use, NIST, 800, 171, 53, et cetera, and regulations, and they try to impose security through contracts, right? And so if you're a defense contractor, they're ensuring that you're meeting some set standard that meets their cybersecurity requirements. What we see, though, is while that works for prime contractors in the very first degree of people receiving those contracts from the government, down chain in their supply chain is where we start to see a lot of risk introduced. And so the supply chain and the private sector that powers the government through those relationships is where a lot of these threats are coming in. And so you see, small, medium businesses that are making, small parts, but their cybersecurity programs are not necessarily always up to snuff with what the government is requiring and the subcontractors there. And so what we saw is the government's now pushing out, as opposed to a self-attestation, which all of these organizations used to do, they're now putting regulations in place through CMMC, where these small businesses are going to have their security programs audited. It's no longer going to be enough to just self-attest. Yes, we are secure. We meet all 110 controls of NIST 800, 171. And so it's going to be proving that to an external auditor and ensuring that you're not only checking the box, but you're doing these in a mature fashion.
From that standpoint, before I move on to the next question, I'm also curious, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm also just kind of thinking out loud that small businesses that have to meet these standards, like hopefully large corporations as well, it impacts their bottom line, right? You have to put in possibly more efforts. Like, again, they should have been doing it. So maybe if you think about it, it's like, spending money should not increase because, hey, you already said you were doing it. Now we're just making sure you're doing it. So there's no dollars being spent, but let's also be real about it. It's impacting their bottom line. So I'm curious how that will kind of play out. There's a trickle down effect in terms of cost. You mentioned the government. So the Biden administration is enacting a sweeping ban on the Kaspersky Labs software in the US. Can you explain this to the viewers? What happened and what's the deal with that?
Sure. For those of you not aware, Kaspersky, it's a security vendor out of Russia. They provide antivirus and EDR solutions to protect your computers. There's been suspicions that they've been linked to the Russian government, and there's a fear that the use of these tools could allow espionage to occur through the access that they would provision to the Russian government. And so what the Biden administration does, Kaspersky had previously been banned in the federal government space. They expanded that band into private sector as well. And so what they changed was you no longer will be able to procure Kaspersky, but also you no longer will be allowed to update it. And so what this has caused is sort of an opportunity cost for a lot of the small businesses that you were talking about, in terms of, given limited resources and limited financial constraints, they're now needing to make a decision between replacing Kaspersky versus the other security endeavors that they were already planning to do for the year. And so the impacts, I think from, is it the right thing to do and ban it? If they have the intelligence to show that it is, absolutely. But the means of which, right, they didn't outright ban the use of it. They banned the updating of it. And so, there is a concern that you'll have people still using this thinking, oh, great, I'm protected. But your antivirus or EDR that's no longer getting updates is, it's dead in the water as soon as it stops getting updates. And so there's a real fear that people are going to sort of languish on doing these updates, and you'll have companies out there that are not as protected as maybe they think that they are.
I remember having like the Norton virus softwares, which you thought were safe if you bought it from the disk back in the day. But then even if you were downloading it online, you never knew if you were downloading the real thing, or if it was a Trojan situation where they were just pretending to be that, but you're actually downloading a virus and not a virus protector.
Oh, we see that QuickBooks is the biggest offender. We see with that lately.
Really? Yeah, especially around tax season, I'm sure.
Yep. Downloading QuickBooks, they think they're going to go get some legitimate version of it or some free pirated version. And no, it's a malicious version of it.
Sometimes I don't understand scams or the idea of it. Like, I can't tell you, I think 2 times a week I get a text message that says, hey, it's been a long time. How you been? Or I kid you not, I had one text message on Monday. It was the most amazing thing. It said, hey, I changed my number. How are you? Well, if you change your number, how am I supposed to know who you are? You got to think through these things, scammers.
Yep.
But okay. Why do you think there's like an ongoing security threat when it comes to cyber posed as a nation state actors, and how geopolitical factors influence cybersecurity regulations as well? And I am also keeping in mind that there were rumors or conversations about Russia influencing our elections, about Meta possibly not doing the greatest job to make sure fake news in either direction wasn't properly vetted as well. What's the biggest advantage to nation state actors influencing what happens here in the US, especially through cybersecurity regulations?
Well, I mean, everything is an information war now. Either you're trying to prevent other people from accessing their own information, you're trying to provide misinformation and redirect everybody. Motives vary, right? Some of this is, like you said, geopolitical. If they want to influence elections, they want to get their favorable candidates in place. Others are just to sow discontent and dissatisfaction within the US. And so a lot of these motivations are, right, they're staging themselves in order to, there's some benefit to getting out of this. It's not always immediately obvious, but ultimately it's all an information war at this point. And so the more that you can disrupt and influence the way that information is being consumed, the better.
Now, when it comes to, well, you've got a question in the chat, which by the way, I'll get to here last, but let's talk about the CrowdStrike and Microsoft IT outage. Again, I want to make it very clear, not a hack, glitch, some intern, whatever the case may be, right? This wasn't a bad actor that we know of. What are your thoughts on this though? Because it's bad enough that you have to worry about a bad actor, but then when you shoot yourselves in the foot, that's not fun either. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity or information security is not just limited to preventing hacks. A lot of what I concern myself with, just as I also run internal security for Huntress, is our own availability and our own backup and disaster recovery plans. And so being resilient is not just making sure that you are preventing hackers and ensuring that you have all the alerts in place to when they're knocking on your door, but it's also ensuring that should something happen, that you're prepared for those inevitabilities. And really the availability of your business is a cybersecurity concern that most people don't traditionally think of when they think of InfoSec. But thinking through sort of what happened, right? Errant update from CrowdStrike. And how do you position this? I think, I've been asked a lot around, CrowdStrike has ISO 27001 or SOC 2, right? They have all these frameworks in place. How could something like this happen? And I think a lot of people forget that like risk management is the goal is to minimize risk, not eliminate it. And so anytime that you're integrating a third party into your tech stacks, ensuring that like you are doing that in a resilient manner and not relying on your vendors being perfect, ultimately will lead you to have better uptime, more availability, and not have some of these issues occur. But also running through them, right? Like, what if your most widely used software is either compromised or makes your systems unavailable or becomes unavailable itself, and running through those scenarios.
Then, from the question in the chat that I promised I'd get to is, how do you stop that? So I guess what I'll rephrase it as is, what can the people watching, what can Americans do to better protect themselves from these bad actors?
From like a misinformation standpoint?
Yeah, from like a misinformation standpoint, or, things that they shouldn't click on, or different things like that. Like what precautions do you take, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah. Assume malice. At this point, if you get a text message, an email, you should just assume that anybody contacting you is doing it maliciously. If your bank texts you, you should call them, not engage via the text message, and generally approaching the digital world now with extraordinary caution, and assuming that whomever you're engaging with is likely a malicious actor or a compromised legitimate account. There's also very basic, just from an identity protection perspective, you had mentioned it, freezing your credit. If you're not actively using your credit, you should absolutely go and freeze it. At this point, everybody should assume compromise and that their own information is fully out there. And so take the proactive steps to defend yourself. Don't just hope that nobody is going to find your information. They will.
It's always a little scary, because it's like, if they have the information, there's one small step that you need to miss for them to be able to get access, And I think definitely those credit card monitoring companies, again, find legitimate ones that have been around for a while and have, great reviews and all that, so that if someone does try something, you do get alerted. It might be annoying to get an alert from your credit card company whenever you spend $3 at a gas station, but it's worth it for when a $3,000 purchase is being made at a Best Buy 7 states away from you. Chris, thank you. Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That was Chris Henderson, who is the Senior Director of Threat Ops at Huntress. And, we appreciate the questions from the chat. You're more than welcome to keep them coming as well. We've got 2 more interviews lined up for you. I got a chance to once again talk to Stephanie Link, someone who I have great respect for, someone who I watched on CNBC and The Street when she was there. And we talked about cybersecurity, but also a couple of other trade ideas that she has on the board. Take a look at this pre-recorded conversation that I had with her earlier. Next guest, you've gotten her great insights on CNBC, and now you get them here at Benzinga. I want to bring on Stephanie Link, who is a Chief Investment Strategist and Portfolio Manager at Hightower Advisors. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited. No, we had such a great conversation last time when we talked about AI, and coincidentally, some of the things we talked about then have kind of started to play out today. So I want to, maybe bring that up as well, but give me your overall thoughts when it comes to cybersecurity market and the outlook that we're seeing.
Yeah, I think, and I've said this for a while, I think that cybersecurity, the total addressable market, is just as big as AI. And I think sometimes that surprises people, but there are 2 places where chief investment technology officers are spending money currently. They are spending it on AI because they're trying to figure out what it even means for their business. And they're forced to spend on cybersecurity because of all the potential damage. They can't afford to wake up one morning or one evening and have their business completely obliterated. So the 2 areas are growing double digits. And that's not to say that other places within technology that they're not spending, but it's more like 2 to 3% growth for enterprise, even cloud. And then 12, 13, 14% on AI and non-cyber. And the cost of a data breach is up this year alone 10% year over year. The average cost is 4.9 million, up from 3.8 million just in 2018. So it's grown pretty substantially to have a data breach, let alone the damage that it does. And 67% of organizations that we've talked to, that you read about, are deploying AI for cybersecurity. And that's because it lowers the time and it lowers the cost for the organization to use this technology. So they kind of feed into each other. And I just think that those are the 2 areas where you have to have some sort of exposure. You can own the ETF hack, or you can pick some of the stocks, and the stocks are a little volatile. So you just have to know and kind of brace yourself and kind of just buy them and just forget about it, because it's a trend that's not going to go away.
Yeah. And, one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about cybersecurity is the hack that I don't remember the exact name of it wasn't a dealership, but it was the company that kind of works with the majority of dealers in the US. I mean, I have friends in dealerships and it was the end of the month and they couldn't figure out the right amount of commission. They couldn't close deals. So you had folks that have been in the business pull out a pen and paper and being like, let me show you young guns, how it's done back in my day. And you had that. And then of course you have CrowdStrike, which I want to get about, your insights on your purchase there.
Sure.
Of course, not a hack related thing, but still not a great look. I mean, the stock had gone down, I think maybe 50 plus points since then. Talk to me about your CrowdStrike purchase.
So I've never owned CrowdStrike. Because it was always too expensive for me. But we all know it's the number one player with the number one management team in the industry. We also know that they have the best in class technology in terms of security and efficacy on security. And so for me, when this announcement, the software glitch, which was a big one, when it was announced, the stock fell rather, as you mentioned, like 50 points. And I was just watching it. And I was just waiting to see what, more from the legal point of view, what might be the problem for the company. And it wasn't negligence. It really was a software glitch. They're certainly accountable. They're probably going to lower guidance as a result, because they're probably going to have to discount to their customers. I don't think, though, from what I've read, they've seen a lot of churn, maybe 1% to 2%. Again, probably going to come out and lower the bar when they report in 2 weeks. But I do think down 41%. This stock went from 22 times EV to sales down to 13 times. Yeah. And for me, the way I like to invest is if I can get the best in class company in any given industry on sale, I'll do it. So I might be early, Zunaid. They may lower numbers and the stock may fall another 10%, but they actually may lower numbers and people say, fine, they reset the bar and now here we go. So that was my mindset with regards to buying that stock.
And, I watched your interview. It was like a podcast with Josh Brown. And I know you've said this many of times, whenever you're on CNBC, everywhere else, where people sometimes are like, oh, well, you missed a trade on NVIDIA. But this, I think, is a perfect example of how sometimes it's okay to not be involved with a stock if it's too high based on your own formula, because this type of opportunity, like you just got with CrowdStrike, may end up happening. So I know that's kind of been your strategy. And so far, it's gotten a chance to better value in terms of price point for CrowdStrike. And I hope it works out. Yeah. You also have Delta and everyone else that are going to look for those discounts, that are going to look to kind of get some compensation. I think I saw somewhere where they were looking for like $10 Uber Eats gift cards. It was something really weird, but compensation is definitely something that you'll need more on that. Are there any other cybersecurity names that you're looking at in terms of buyer, or even in terms of I'm staying away from this unless X happens?
Well, I'll tell you, I had owned Fortinet and I sold it a little too early, but I did make a lot of money because I'd owned it for quite a few years. But they stumbled. They stumbled last year 3 different times. And I think that they benefited from COVID and all the spend that happened, especially on firewall. But they were going through a transition from product revenue to services revenue, which is a strategy that I'm very popular about. I feel really good about them doing that. I just thought it was going to take a little bit longer for them to see and realize the monetization from the services piece. Well, they got it last quarter for the first time in 4. So unfortunately, stock rallied a lot. I missed it, but it is certainly one that where the expectations are still really low, and they're like the number 3 player. So if that were to pull back, that's fine. But if I could get CrowdStrike down 41% from the peak, that's what I'm going to do all day long.
How do you deal with, our viewers are retail investors or retail traders. And I know something we often talk about is kind of like FOMO, where you're like, a stock is going and you're not invested in it. I mean, you're dealing with millions and billions of dollars worth of strategy and holdings. How do you kind of deal with the mindset of, this stock has gone without me, I will move on. There are plenty of other opportunities.
So it's a great question. And I'll tell you, because I didn't, and I don't own NVIDIA. Certainly I missed it. It was, great stock. I think it will be for a long time to come. Yeah. But what I try to do is, okay, who is the next best player in what's happening with AI? And so I actually got maybe a little bit lucky with Broadcom, because I bought Broadcom 2-3 years ago. And I just liked the fact that they had a more diversified revenue mix. So it is AI and it's cloud, but it's networking, it's enterprise, and now it's software because they made the acquisition with VMware. And so I believe very much in the AI theme, as we were just talking. Missed NVIDIA, where else can I go? And I don't think I'm sacrificing that much in terms of quality of management, quality of product, quality of execution. In fact, I think they're neck and neck in terms of all of those things. And in the meantime, the valuation is half of NVIDIA. So got a little lucky getting into it before the VMware deal, because I think that really is when the stock really started to re-rate, because it's software, it's more recurring revenue, it's higher margins, higher free cash flow. So that's the way I am playing it. And then the other way I play AI is through the memory guys. I don't think that people understand you need 6 times. I think we talked about this last time. So you need 6 times the memory for AI. Lam Research, Applied Materials, KLA. I mean, these are names that are going to benefit substantially. And we haven't even really begun to see wafer fab equipment spend tick higher. We're getting like dribs and drabs of a little bit better demand, but nothing like what we saw at the peak. And so the valuation's also still very interesting. And Lam Research in 2 weeks ago, it was down 20% in 2 days after this whole yen carry trade unwind. So I added to it because I think, again, best in class on sale.
And, I'm glad you brought up the yen carry trade, because, I mean, everyone thought it was the end of the world. I think we were down maybe about 4 to 5%. I don't exactly remember, a couple of Mondays ago. And you had folks coming out of the woodworks being like, I told you we'd get a down limit. It's like, well, one, you said that 3 years ago. You know what I mean? Everyone's, 100 times the last 7 predictions have been correct in terms of a crash. But what are your thoughts on the yen carry trade? Do you feel like the worst is behind us? Was it overreaction? Are you still concerned just in terms of the general market?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a surprise. The velocity of the move down was really quite extreme. And Japan, we know that was down 12% in one day. But I think what's interesting since then is a couple things. One, the BOJ backed off of their monetary policies. Oh, we're going to raise rates, which, by the way, I don't even know why they did feel like they had to raise rates. They don't have an inflation problem at all. Their labor market is fine. But be that as it may, once they backed out and backed down from that monetary policy kind of mistake, if you will, their market stabilized. In fact, it recouped the entire amount that it lost. And then at the same time, we saw better economic data here. We got ISM services that was expansionary, with new orders expansionary, with employment solid. We had 2 initial jobless claims, which we know we get weekly, and they were fine. Certainly, you're seeing a slowing down of the labor market here, but it is certainly not a crash by any means. In fact, the 4-week moving average for weekly jobless claims is running about 240,000. And during recessions, that number gets as high as 350 to 375,000 weekly jobless claims. So we're nowhere near a recession on the job side of things. At the same time, we got a lot of progress on inflation. I mean, we went from 9.1% CPI to 2.5% in 2.5 years. It's under control. So, and the labor market is softening a little bit. So now we're going to probably start to see an easing cycle. And we all know that phrase, don't fight the Fed, not on the way up and not on the way down. And when the Fed usually eases, that's usually very positive for stocks. And then lastly, long-winded answer, but last we have earnings. All the better economic data suggests we're growing at around 2.5% in the US. That's pretty good. And that's led to 11.8% earnings growth. So stocks have been actually, the earnings have been going higher, and stocks follow profits, as we know. So that's why I kind of felt like it was hard to buy 2 weeks ago. But I thought, as I mentioned, I had a couple of stocks that were just hit so hard that where they just reported good earnings. They beat, they raised, the valuations have compressed. So that was the opportunity. And I still think you can pick and choose at a couple of different sectors, non-tech.
And with that yen carry trade, I mean, the 1-2 punch was also, Warren Buffett selling so much of his Apple stock that it was like, oh my God, their greatest investor ever is selling. And we have this has to be the end.
Yes.
And, things just kind of worked for folks who may have been looking for some downside. Last question for me. Election cycle, right? Back and forth in terms of who the president's going to be for us next. No matter who wins, what are some trade ideas that you have that folks can maybe start to think about as we get closer and closer to November?
Well, I think what will matter more than who wins as president, it'll be what happens to Congress. Is it a mixed Congress? If it's a mixed Congress, the markets are going to like that, because unfortunately, a mixed Congress, not a lot gets done. So keep an eye on that. That's number one. Number two, and it does seem like it was really in favor of Trump just a couple of weeks ago, and now it's leaning a little bit more balanced. So we'll see. But a lot of it is noise and a lot of it is opportunity. I will tell you, my still favorite theme, beyond cyber and AI, my still favorite theme is anything tied to to power, to grid, to data center. So companies like Quanta Services, Eaton, GE Vernova, those are companies that I think are going to benefit from the long run. They may get hit if Trump wins, because people will say, "Oh, well, all the infrastructure, all the bills that were passed last year, they're going to end. They're not going to be recognized." I don't think that's that easy, and I think we are a nation that needs to spend on the grid. We haven't spent any money on the grid, in incremental money on the grid in 50 years. We are going to spend $4 trillion between now and 2050 on grid and data centers. And so that is a theme that I think, in some sort of dislocation, if we get it, I think you want to be buying those names just because the theme is so incredibly powerful. No pun intended.
I think this past weekend, Kevin O'Leary said that no matter who wins this election, you can expect crypto regulations. And so on that similar train, no matter who wins, we're going to spend money on grid. So we have to, if we want to stay ahead of the game in the space of AI, crypto, and all that good stuff as well. And as always, thank you so much for your time, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to more of these conversations.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. You got it. That is Stephanie Link, who is a chief investment strategist and portfolio manager at Hightower Advisors. You know, I've been doing about maybe 10 of these shows and I haven't really ever muted myself. My apologies there. We're going to have Imtiaz coming up here in just a moment. But on the Stephanie Link side, I wanted to say that no matter who wins this election, I think it's always great to have an idea of how you're going to play the stock market, to have your hard-earned money be invested there as well. But next up, we have Imtiaz, who's a managing director and equity research analyst in terms of cybersecurity at Wedbush Securities. Imtiaz, welcome to the show.
Hey, Zineth. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. I appreciate your time here today. You know, and the theme of cybersecurity, there's so many different ways to kind of attack this on all different types of angles. Now, I'm glad you're here because you're the expert on these companies and you have the insights on them. General vague question: what are your thoughts on cybersecurity sector as it currently is?
Sure. So one of the biggest areas of spend in IT is security. One of the highest priorities of spend for IT managers is security, cloud, analytics. I think security ranks in the top 3 IT priorities if you speak to IT managers and CIOs. So I think very attractive sector from a customer demand perspective, very attractive from a secular demand perspective. It's a growing sector. AI is another driver which will help security going forward. So if you look at all the secular tailwinds in IT, cloud, AI, that's all going to benefit security going forward.
And then where do you see the outlook we've seen cybersecurity in the sense of like, no matter what is happening in the world, cybersecurity is always a thing, right? It was always like, oh, don't click on this incorrect link, or, hey, you didn't actually win, $1,000 or $1 million or whatever. And I do want to show your disclosure graphic here for the folks at home so you can understand your thought process behind your opinions. But what's the outlook? Like, how can people protect themselves when it comes to cybersecurity and these threats that are from bad actors?
Yeah, so you have, everything is going to the cloud. You have more and more workloads in the enterprise space going to the cloud. So then within security, you have different buckets, right? You have firewalls, which protect your network. Then you have the email security, which protects your email. Then you have web security. So I guess, if you look at it from a consumer perspective, email and web security is the most critical for consumers. When you look at the enterprise side, businesses, they would look at network security, identity security. There's more and more workloads going to the cloud. So customers need cloud workloads to be secure. So you can look at security in different buckets. For enterprises, it's different. For consumers, it's mostly email and web security, like you mentioned.
And then here are your disclosures. You cover CrowdStrike. The company's been going through a lot of things in the news, shall we say. What are your thoughts on like the outage, and what do you think about the company's future? I mean, the stock had dipped, I believe, slightly below 200 for a couple of days, and then it came right back up because you fix things, right, in terms of the glitch, the outage, but now you've got lawsuits possibly to kind of think about because of the unfortunate, unintended damage that was done to people that rely on you.
Yeah, so I guess if you look at the exposure in terms of, I guess, risk to the company, you have like two buckets, right? You have the lawsuit exposure, you have companies, customers suing CrowdStrike to collect damages, and then you have the risk to new business, right? Would new customers come on the platform, right? Or would existing customers keep on buying from CrowdStrike? So when you look at those two buckets of risk, lawsuit and I guess liability exposure, that's something that's very minimal. If you look at the contract that CrowdStrike has with the customers, their liability is capped at a very, at a fairly reasonable level. The cyber insurance policy that CrowdStrike has, which will help them pay those damages. So I think when you look at the damages from a lawsuit or liability angle, that's pretty minimal. We had calls and talks with legal experts and cyber insurance experts, and what we found was that given the language in the contracts, given the reason why this happened, the liability damage is fairly limited for CrowdStrike. The bigger risk is what happens to new business going forward, right? Would customers keep coming back to CrowdStrike? Would they buy from CrowdStrike again? That risk is unknown. And that I think is still a valid risk. We'll find out. They'll report in the next few days. We'll see what they say about how much business is down because of the outage.
And then it's also the current clients, one, maybe buying again or not buying, but two, looking for a discount, right? Everybody loves a good discount. As soon as somebody messes up, you're like, whoa. What am I getting off on this end, right? And that's something to look at. And, you're the second person. We talked to Stephanie Link before who's mentioned that she did her homework on the legal side. You've done your homework on the legal side. And it doesn't look like this was a, negligent aspect of things. So like you said, liability doesn't look that bad for CrowdStrike, but we'll find out on what they have to say when they report earnings. Let's go to another stock, Okta, ticker OKTA. I believe you have an outperform rating and a 130 price target on the company as well. The company reported, in my opinion, another good quarter earlier. What are your thoughts on that? Any expectations on what the future holds, as I believe it reports financial results on the 28th, which is next week, along with NVIDIA, just saying.
Yeah, Okta was actually had a great quarter last quarter. The stock obviously had a bad reaction to that quarter because there was one is they guided a little bit below the street for the next quarter. So they had a good quarter, and the guide was a little bit weak, and they also had the misfortune of having earnings the same night as Salesforce had their earnings. So the whole space blew up the next day. So it was a good quarter. The guide was a little bit light, and that's why the stock blew up. I think the stock should be fine next week. Checks on the space have been fairly positive. They are one of the leaders in the identity security space. That space is very important when you think about zero trust, which is the new architecture that everyone in the enterprise space is moving to for security. So they're kind of the cornerstone company when it comes to zero trust. This is the new architecture for security. They're well positioned there from a product perspective. Competition is an issue for them. Microsoft is also in the same space, so they're seeing some issue with that. They had some breaches over the last 12 months, which has impacted their traction a little bit with the customers, but I think that's behind them now. The last quarter was good. The checks have come in good for this quarter, so we feel good about the rest of what going into the print.
And then on the other hand, you have SentinelOne, ticker S, that reported a somewhat weak quarter last time. What are your expectations coming up there? I believe that company reports on Tuesday, the 27th. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, if you think about the beneficiaries of this whole cloud outage, I think one of the companies that is in the top of my list would be SentinelOne. They're in the same space as CrowdStrike. They're competitors with CrowdStrike. If you have a customer who wanted to go to CrowdStrike yesterday and now is deciding not to go to CrowdStrike, what's the next best option for him? SentinelOne. So I think we will not see an immediate impact this quarter because it's too soon for that impact to be evident in the numbers. But I think longer term, next 2 or 3 quarters, SentinelOne is one of the companies that probably benefits from all the issues that CrowdStrike is having. The stock is one of the cheapest stocks in our coverage. This trades at almost half the average multiple for security stocks. So given that it's a cheaper stock, it has the right product. They've had issues with competition with Microsoft and CrowdStrike. They're competing with 2 of the biggest players in the space. So that's why the results have been a little bit uneven. But I think with this incremental tailwind coming from the CrowdStrike outage, the stock being cheap, I think these guys are also well positioned going forward.
Taz, I've got 2 more questions for you, but I got to get one from the chat. They're asking for your thoughts on CLOV. Are you able to provide any insights? This is live, so.
No, I'm sorry. I probably can't add any more value on that stock. CLOV, no, I apologize.
Fair enough. No worries at all. Let's talk to one that I believe you might have some insights on. That is RBRK. Any thoughts on that and the outlook there?
Yeah, so Rubrik is a new IPO, new security company that just went public about a quarter ago. They've had just one quarter as a public company. This company is a leader in backup and what is known as cyber resiliency. So attacks will happen no matter what, right? I mean, you've seen attacks happen all through the last decade, and we've seen security spend go up. You've had more and more security products come into the market, but that doesn't really stop attacks, right? So bad actors are always one step ahead of the good guys. So you can buy all the firewalls in the world, you can buy all the CrowdStrike or and you name any product, you can buy whatever you want, you'll still get breached. So you need to have that last line of defense or that last line of recovery in the event that you get breached. That's where Rubrik comes in. If you get breached, if you get your data gets stolen, your data gets encrypted, you get demands for ransom to get your data back, Rubrik is the company that will save you. So they are a data replication backup and recovery company, and they're the leader in that space. There are 2-3 more companies that they compete with, but Rubrik is by far the best in that space.
We talk about like the aftermath of certain events or the sympathy plays, and I don't have the data to back this up, but from the eye test, if a company gets hacked, these cybersecurity stocks go up. If the cybersecurity stocks get hacked, then the back line of defense that you said, in terms of whether it's like your Credit Karmas of the world, your Rubrik of the world, they're like, oh, now you got to go ahead and get this to make sure you're protected from whatever was leaked here. So no matter what, there are always opportunities in the cybersecurity sector as well. I want to kind of ask, take a whole step back and get, how do you, like, what's your framework when you're looking at these companies, right? Because we have a lot of retail traders, but we also have a lot of retail investors as well. What are any tips or tricks that you might have for them when they're trying to evaluate a company, but they don't have the amount of wisdom and the experience that you have as well? Any tips for them?
I would look at the buckets that this company plays in. So one of the themes that is very common or very popular in the world of security is cloud security, right? More and more workloads are going from the data center into the cloud. Go back 10 years ago, all the workloads were running in company's data center. But now more and more enterprise customers are moving to AWS and Azure, running their workloads in the cloud. The security in the cloud is still very early, right? The tools that are required to secure your cloud workloads are still very early. So any company that's levered to that theme will do well. There's a lot of opportunity there to sell into the cloud security market. The tools there are still very early. They're maturing. Every company wants to get into that area. So I think I would look at security companies which are levered to the right. So security is a big space. It's not just one sector, right? You have network security firewalls. You have endpoint security, you have email, web, identity, cloud security. So I would look at the trends within security that are the most well positioned. So cloud security is one theme that is, I would say, highest growth and has the longest runway. The other one is a theme called SASE, SASE, and zero trust. There are companies like Zscaler that are levered to that trend. So I would look at buckets within security which have the longest runway for growth.
I remember back in 2020 when the chaos in the markets were happening, I had puts on the market. This was when, unfortunately, it was going up. And I would literally Google why the market will continue going down. And what I'm trying to say is sometimes when you're doing research on these companies, you're looking for like these confirmation biases to just read information that just says, oh yeah, you're right, this is what's going to happen because of XYZ. How do you as a professional kind of cut out the noise to make sure that like you are staying as pragmatic, logical, fact-related, because you're also human as well?
Well, two things, right? My framework is based on doing homework on the ground, right? We go to events, conferences, we have calls every single day with people who are in the field. We speak to customers every single day. We speak to channel partners who sell these products every single week.
Yeah.
So we try to make sure that we are in the flow of information, what's happening in the field, who's winning share, who's losing share. And if I do speak to CISO, I ask him, well, you only have a limited number of dollars to spend. Where are you taking the dollars away from? Like, who's losing share in terms of your IT spend? Who's getting share? So information is important. We try to be as close to the people who are making the decisions as much as possible. And second is discipline in terms of valuation and numbers, right? You don't want to buy a stock at any price. You could like a company could be a great company, but could be a bad stock. And there are many examples of good companies being bad stocks. So we try to combine, data we hear from the field with, what is being priced in already. And is there more than what is being priced in the stock today? I could love a company, but that company is trading at a valuation where a lot of the goodness is already there. So the incremental goodness is not as much as you would expect.
My favorite thing is when my friends tell me, oh, this stock is great because X is going to happen. But I'm like, X was already known that was going to happen 3 months ago. You're saying it's not priced in. You're saying everyone is just ignoring it. You know what I mean? But this was great. I appreciate your insights, Taz. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You got it. That is Taz, who is the managing director and equity research analyst in the cybersecurity space at Wedbush Securities. Hopefully you got some great insights from our 3 guests today and some good trade ideas to think about as well. Cybersecurity, like a lot of other sectors, in my opinion, isn't going anywhere. And sometimes you want to make sure you diversify your portfolio, maybe through an ETF. Hack is a good one to take a look at, or some of the other recommendations that you saw. As always, though, do your own due diligence, do your own homework. And I can't express enough that just because you love the company doesn't mean you have to like the stock as well. Manage your risk. It's your hard-earned money that you're putting at work as well. And we thank you for watching this webinar on cybersecurities. We'll see you next time.